Can I say a huge thank you to all of you? Thank you. Yes, of course. Whatever it was you said is true. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along tonight. These events don't happen by accident or by chance. And when we put this event up on Facebook only a few days ago, people started responding immediately, and we have this enormous crowd here tonight. Several thousand of us here tonight. And I understand some of the media think this is a small and moderate crowd, and it's apparently the sort of thing that happens every night all over the country in political meetings everywhere. So I just say to them gently, do some maths and realise how many people are now engaged seriously in politics because they want to see change, and they see the possibility of change, and above all they see their involvement in how that change can come about. And so to those of you who have come tonight, thank you very much. But also to the many people that are following us tonight, live streamed on Facebook, thank you for following us, and thank you for joining in, because this campaign is a campaign for the leadership of the Labour Party, of course, but it's also a big discussion, a big debate about the kind of society and kind of politics we want. Many of the straight media simply don't get it and don't understand it, that thousands of people actually want to be involved, their voice to be heard, their views to be listened to, and they are able to make a contribution to bring about a decent, fair and just society which is possible. That can only be done if we're all involved in a decent, respectful way. But political movements don't come about by accident. They're built on a long past of people that have made huge sacrifices to bring about elements of justice, to bring about the rights that we have. This area where this huge now church is a place where there's been enormous radical struggles over many years, where many migrant communities made their homes in Kilburn, particularly the Irish community. They suffered discrimination and abuse. They suffered appalling work practices. They also came together in enormous strength to try to bring justice to the building industry, to try to bring communities don't come together. It was Irish building workers who supported the women of Grunwick in the strike there. And I will have forever in my mind the image of the late great Tom Durkin and Mrs. Desai together on the picket line at Grunwick, demanding rights of representation at work, absolutely united together. They couldn't have been more different in their background, they couldn't have been more united in their principles, their policies, and the kind of world they wanted to live in. And when we were trying to bring justice for the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 and so many other of those campaigns, every one of those that was successful, as was Hillsborough eventually, and will be Orgreave eventually. So we need to be strong in our appreciation of all those that have gone before and that have taught us so much. Because when we understand our own history of our movement, the sacrifices that were made to found trade unions, to found the Labour Party, to found so many other justice organisations, we then have an appreciation of where our strength comes from and where, from those lessons, we can go forward. I also want you to say, if you would, a big thank you to all the volunteers who are part of our campaign. Not just those that put together tonight's event, but all those that are working in so many other ways, on phone banks, on social media, on leafleting, on street stalls, on campaigning events, on speaking up at party meetings, union meetings, and all those campaigning groups. There's something that brings us together, and it is a thirst for a more decent, a democratic society, the socialist values that unite us. It's that that brings us together, but it's our thanks we owe to those that make sure day in and day out. This is the 25th event we've done as part of this leadership campaign so far. Don't worry, there's plenty more to go. We've been in all parts of England and Wales, and we'll be in Scotland this week. We're doing them in a slightly different way than we did them last year. Most of them are open-air events because we usually can't find halls big enough to fit the crowd into. Streets and market squares all over the country. We had well over 3,000 people in Sheffield on Friday night. We had hundreds, if not thousands, on the streets in Leeds, in Hull, in Liverpool, in Brighton, in Cornwall, and there are plenty more to go, because we want people to have the opportunity to hear the message we're trying to give, but also to bring people together in that sense of unity. What we're also doing is running it as we would run an election campaign. To say to everyone, in a decent society, your children wouldn't be leaving university with massive debts. In a decent society, you wouldn't be walking past beggars and rough sleepers when you come home at night on the train or on the bus. In a decent society, you wouldn't be ignoring the needs of those people living in bad and overcrowded accommodation. We'd be reaching out to everybody in every part and every community of Britain. So we're running this campaign at one level, yes, for the election of the leader of the party, but it's also about the kind of society we want and reaching out to people to have that discussion. So nearly all the places we go to, we also have a quite long discussion with a random group of people who talk about many things. They talk about the housing crisis that's facing the whole country, and I'll come back to that in a moment. They talk about rights at work and the problems they have of representation, of insecure employment, of zero-hours contracts. They talk about that. They also talk about the way older people are often disrespected and ignored within our society. They also talk about the appalling levels of casual and determined sometimes and deeply nasty always racist abuse that takes place so often around this country. Those discussions bring people together. Those discussions, to me, are a good way that you hear people's views, are a good way of founding what ought to be a democratic process for policy making, not just in our party, but also in our unions and in our country itself. The issue has to be how we build a strong, real and meaningful democracy within our society. Tony Benn often told me that you could draw a parallel line of the growth of democracy and democratic accountability with the social advances that were made. I remember him telling me, and we discussed it at great length, the way in which the principles of the English Civil War were actually about the accountability of the then Parliament and holding the then divine right of rule of the King to account of that Parliament. But it also unleashed so many other demands. Questions about land, questions about rights, questions about freedom of assembly and freedom of worship. Much of that was temporarily silenced by the counter-revolution that took place later on. But then you trace from the 19th century onwards the growth of democracy, the the Great Reform Act of 1832, built on all the struggles of the hardship and misery at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Only a few years later, we had the first Factories Acts through Parliament. Only 30 years after that, we had the principles of universal education. Only 50 years after that, we had the first serious debate about the principles of social security and the kind of inclusive society we would all want to live in. We gained the rights of women to vote because of the hardship of those that laid down their lives in many cases and struggled for the right of women to vote, inspired by earlier great thinkers such as Mary Wollstonecraft and so many others that had that idea that you had to challenge the narrative. So I say that because it is democracy that we're talking about, and it is the principles behind it. We can only develop as a democratic society if all our young people are brought up and grow up understanding where our rights have come from, understanding where our achievements have come from. They were never handed down from above. The NHS was never a gift from the professions or the medical industry. It was something achieved from the ground up. And so it is about that expression and exertion of democracy. And so there are a number of principles behind this that I want to just let you know about tonight. The first one, the principle of democracy, has to be the ground up. That you listen to what people say, they have a real voice in it, they have their opinions and ideas going forward. I tell you this, how you develop an economic strategy could be done by economists, yes, and there are good economists around who give you some very good ideas. There are also people who work in factories, in call centres, in local authorities,